Hi, this is Cheryl Johnson. This again is part of a series of assessments and evaluation for deaf and hard of hearing children. This is part 1, birth to 3, and we're going to be talking about module 2 now, which is terminology that we use in the evaluation and assessment process. These terms are from the regulations for IDEA. And just a brief description of how laws come about. Laws are passed by Congress or some state legislative body, and then regulations are developed based on those laws through the appropriate agency. So laws related to special education, once they're passed by Congress, they go to the Department of Education and then the Office of Special Education Programs. One of the nice things about regulations is they come out in draft form, and that allows parents and parent advocates and professionals to provide input to the proposed regulations before they're actually final. So in this process that occurs, it's supposed to occur every 5 years, but actually occurs maybe now every 10 years because of the political nature of our government. But nonetheless, it's a good place for parents to have a voice in how these regulations are developed. So the first definition we're going to address is evaluation. And these are the procedures that are done to just determine eligibility for your child. So they're not necessarily in depth, but they do have some stipulations that go with them that we'll talk about. Another definition is assessment. And I know that evaluation and assessment often get mixed up. And in Part C, they have specific definitions, with assessment now being the more in-depth assessment in a variety of areas that really identify the strengths of your child, the needs, and leading to the services that are going to be part of the IFSP, the Individual Family Service Plan. So let's look at some terminology. This is a little technical. Maybe if some of you have had a stat course, you might remember these definitions, but you might also be familiar with the bell curve. When you were in school, oftentimes assessments were based on scoring that was based on the entire group. So in your class, if you took a test, you would get what we call a normal distribution curve. Some would do very well, some fall in that middle range, and others fall in the lower part of that bell curve. Anything that's in the +2 to -2 part of the bell curve, which is the majority of the curve, is within the normal range. So when we talk about standard deviation, those are the standard deviations, and they're looking at the spread from the mean of the test score. So if we have children who are +1 or +2 standard deviations above the mean, they're within the normal range. If we have scores that are -1 or -2 standard deviations below the mean, they're also in the normal range. So there's a wide range of normal when we look at the entire population of children who might be taking a test. The median, the median is the middle score in the distribution. So if your scores range from 0 to 100, the median score would be 50. Then we have the percentile rank. And this is important because a lot of times the percentile rank is included in the reporting of scores for young children. And they would be a percentile number, such as 84%, that then tells you how many students fall below that point on this bell curve distribution. So if your child is at the 84th percentile, that means that your child is at the 84th percentile, and 84% of children are performing at that level or less. That also means that about 16% of children are performing at a higher level. Some more terms that you may encounter. First is raw score, and this is the actual number of scored items that are correct on a particular test. So if there's 30 items on the test and your student or your child gets 5 right, then the raw score would be 5. In order to compare scores across tests or across groups of children, they're converted to a standard score. Another term that we use is called a confidence interval. And this is a way of estimating the reliability of a test. So in this particular example, if we're looking at 90% confidence, we know that if that student or another student gets the same score on a test, that they're going to fall within that range that we call the confidence interval. at least 90% of the time. So in the example for you on the screen, you see a raw score that shows that that was 139. That was converted to a standard score of 120. We don't know need to know how to convert to standard score. That's all done statistically. The confidence interval is between 116 and 124, meaning that achieving that standard score of 120 on a repeated test would get us within this interval 90% of the time. And for this particular set of scores, that standard score of 120 is at the 91st percentile rank, so quite high. Some more terms that are important. Mean is the average of the scores. So you could have your child taking multiple subtests or taking a test with multiple trials, and you might average their performance across 5 different times of attempting that. Or the mean could be the average of a group of students who are taking a test, and we average out the scores to come up with a mean. So it's the average of the scores, whether it be for one person or for a group. Age equivalent refers to the estimated age that a score typically would correspond to. So if your child chronologically is 3 years, 5 months, they may test out on a particular test depending on their score above their chronological age or below their chronological age. Then tests are normed differently. There's norm reference tests, which is more like a bell curve, where you're going to have the test scores standardized on a group of individuals that represent a sample of typical people in a classroom, students in a classroom, or a particular group of children. And that would be related again to the bell curve that we talked about. Or there are criterion reference tests, and they look more at a mastery level. So if you're teaching a class and you decide the A range on a test is 90% to 100%, and the B range is 80% to 89%. That's a criterion referenced test, so that you're looking at the mastery level of the student or the child, depending on what that is for that particular test. Here is a sample of the MacArthur-Bates Communication Development Inventory. This is a test that's often used with young children that looks at words and gestures. So the top part of this is talking about the number of words children used, and it's decided through a vocabulary checklist. So in this particular example, the young child was able to identify 15 of the 680 words, and that performance put them under the first percentile. In a slightly advanced part of words and gestures that looks at sentences, here we can see we're looking at the length of a child's 3 longest sentences. So here we have 3 trials. The first time the length was 2 words. The second time the sentence was 3 words. And the third time the sentence was 2 words. So now we're seeing how that mean applies. So we average those 3 scores and come up with a mean of 2.3 words for the average of a child's sentences. And for this particular child, depending on their age, you're going to get a different percentile score. So here we're at the 66th percentile.